So it's wonderful to have you here. And the wonderful thing about it is that you are a practicing member of our tradition. And that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about our tradition and some of the things that you might have an opinion about. We did talk in the last episode, which was the things unsaid, about coven autonomy. And of course, you do have a coven in New Orleans. You're the high priest of the coven. What is coven autonomy, or what is your understanding of coven autonomy?
When we're going to the witches who follow the Book of Shadows, there's a very clear set of practices in there, how to operate a coven, and autonomy is certainly one of them. I think autonomy is extremely important. Part of the reason why Gardnerian and Alexandrian witchcraft, or the religion of witchcraft and its priesthood, have continued to flourish, because it systematically cuts off control. And if you do get bad eggs, well, they're pretty isolated. It's not quite the same as dealing with a mega church, is it? So no matter how charismatic a leader is, or no matter how influential someone can be, they're only supposed to be in a small group of people. So that's one bonus to it. I don't think that, obviously when you guys were speaking about tradition, we walk a tightrope there. I actually would like to look at Alexandrian witchcraft as being, it's more important in its philosophies. Of course, its ritual methods are important as well. However, the philosophies are the backbone of it, in my opinion. The things that Alex did to work differently than his contemporaries at the time were philosophical decisions, like relinquishing control, focusing unapologetically on power, and of course, the philosophy of beauty.
Yeah,
I think the things that makes one Alexandrian is about the training and the practice. What makes a tradition, that's a bit more complicated, because in both Gardnerian and Alexandrians, that the only cohesive thing that all of us have is the Book of Shadows. And quite frankly, I think a great many of them don't follow that. I think that's where the first problem lies. Of course, we, all three of us, come from a similar source of training, which is the Temple of the Mother, which completely misunderstood the fact that people will say things like, oh, Maxine completely changed everything. The one living student of Alexander's really changed everything. I mean, there are others, obviously, who trained with him, but she's, I think we have to say, his star pupil. And I definitely believe she did some innovations like every coven does, but so we do have some training and operations and things that we would recognize among each other. Things like the opening temple rite, the eternal light, things that people wouldn't know what we're talking about when we say them. the way that we do some things may be a little bit different. However, there's very small innovations, and most Alexandrians will recognize. But when you look at the Alexandrian tradition, you also have to say, what time period? I don't think there's anyone besides Maxine alive today who worked in the Manchester Coven, to my knowledge. So that's probably a moot point. However, we do have people alive who worked in the London Coven, the Temple of the Mother, and Bexhill by the Sea. I think those three covens are the real lineages of Alexandrian craft, because you have Alex and Maxine together, and then you have Alex and Maxine separated. So I think those are the three main lines, if we were going to discuss lineage, that we all descend from in some way or another. But those trainings are all recognizable to any trained, fully trained high priest or high priestess. I could see someone working differently and still know it was Alexandrian. So I think that the tightrope, however, is that every coven is going to be a little different. I just had a visit with a high priestess from the UK who trained under the same priestess that I did, and we are virtually identical. But we went to great length to debate with each other over these and thous and errors and bits. And at the end of the day, it wasn't really that important, but we were very passionate about it.
There's this thing that people say that all that unites us together is lineage. Is it really?
No, because without training, lineage is a thing, obviously, but that's not what this is. So first of all, when we were initiated, both Gardnerians and Alexandrians were initiated as witches and priests. We're not initiated as Gardnerian witches and priests, and we're not initiated as Alexandrian witches as priests. That's not what's in the words following the Book of Shadows. What makes you Gardnerian or Alexandrian is your lineage, and from the Alexandrian point of view, your practice. Because I think it was Michael who might have brought it up, though you're both aware that Alex he had the custom of not reinitiating Gardnerians. Because he believed they were already initiated into witchcraft, rightfully so, because the initiations are virtually identical. So they'd already gone through the initiation, they'd already been presented to the quarter lords, they've already been presented to the gods, they've already done all the bells and the whistles. So what would be the point of doing it again? Because the initiation isn't what makes you Alexandrian. It's the training and the practice and the philosophies. So if you think like an Alexandrian and you practice like an Alexandrian and you're initiated into a real lineage of witchcraft, you are Alexandrian, which means Alex did not consider tracing back to him to be necessary to be Alexandrian, because if he didn't reinitiate Gardnerians, he didn't have that as a requirement.
Do you think that initiating people same sex would be changing that which is passed down to us?
Well, I mean, once again, I follow the Book of Shadows, and we're not going to say exactly what the Book of Shadows says. Obviously, that's not what we're doing here. It's not for public consumption. But, I think that a lot of people that hear these podcasts aren't. We get a lot of initiates listening to these podcasts, and you guys are aware of that. Some of them need to listen more. I definitely think that it has nothing to do with witchcraft. Witchcraft is practices as a fertility cult. So it is required that a birth woman initiates a birth man, and a birth man initiates a birth woman. That is not a popular idea when you want to put it out in view of social constructs. However, this is a religious idea, and witchcraft treats the flesh as just as sacred as the spirit. So in that essence, if you know anything about the Kabbalah, we build these things in Western religion to where God is up here in Kether and the dirt is Malkuth. But in witchcraft, you turn that into a circle, and Malkuth and Kether meet. And so in that sense, we are recognizing that our physical self emits a power. And we reflect that in the fact that a man and a woman can have a baby. And all people on this earth, regardless of their sexual orientation or how they identify in life or whatever happens to them, all can relate to having a mother and a father. We all came into this world through a biological mother and a father. And in witchcraft, we see magic as reflected in the material world. A same-sex initiation would, to me, make it an invalid witchcraft lineage, because the Book of Shadows makes it very clear how this must be done. And I also have to point out socially that the only people that actually benefit from same-sex initiation is men. And I think Gardner, for all of the accusations of homophobia, I don't think that was what was on his mind. I think he was trying to set priestesses up in the 1950s when most of them couldn't legally have bank accounts. And he was setting up a situation to where men couldn't have the power. They needed to rely on a priestess to be initiated into the craft. Whether that belief preceded him or not isn't the point of this conversation, obviously. So I think very clearly that if I had an all-gay coven, I would be the Dark Queen. I'd be like Galandria from that moment when she gets the ring, terrible queen ruling over you all. Because it would be easier in some ways, but that's not my religious belief. My religious belief is I need to have other in the circle. I need to have a priestess. The goddess is not just a statue. She's also in witchcraft able to be embodied by an actual biological woman who has had all of the experiences that women are scorned with. And we have to remember that women are the most persecuted people on the planet. It is not a race. It is not a religion. It is still, to date, women. And it doesn't appear so in Western civilization, but we're not the whole world.
I think it does actually really up here, right, in the Western.
Yeah. But I think we're more focused on racism and things like that. Here in America, taking away their rights for abortion. I mean, I think that what's bubbling under the surface is extreme misogyny, and I think it's coming up in the craft as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
I absolutely agree with you, Brian. When you're calling an embryo a human being, which is an impossibility, an embryo needs to have contact with the mother in exchange of hormones and DNA. So you're actually eliminating the woman from the process of creation. So it absolutely is misogynist. Wow. And, we even hear other witches talking about not even naming the god and the goddess, but using different other words so you can imagine the gods as you'd like in terms of sex. So therefore, your gods don't have to be a male or a female. If you are more comfortable with having them both men, then they're both men, which I also think is, again, this sort of elimination of the goddess in a goddess cult, which I find confusing.
I think the big issue is that people forget witchcraft is a religion, and it has a religiosity to it. And of course, you've got droves of people who are claiming or proclaiming to join the craft who don't have a belief in these things. I've seen initiates openly mock the Book of Shadows on Facebook.
Wow. Me too.
And I think, well, why are you involved?
Exactly. Why are you doing this?
Why are you involved? And I do think you guys made a very valid point that it is often that they want the label, and it does come from tradition collectors. And they think the more labels they have, the more wise they are. And I don't know about Kerrigan's experience, but mine has been that most of the tradition collectors I have met and spoken to are the most ill-informed in all of their respective traditions.
And unmagical.
Usually that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's impossible to drill down when you're wearing that many hats. You can't be an expert in all fields.
Who initiated the first witch? Dorian Vinte coined that frame. You guys were talking about that. And this is a conversation I think most of us have been faced with. It's the favorite go-to for the solitary practitioners on Facebook yelling at everyone about how solitary they are.
Yeah.
And I remember Patricia Crowther's response to it, whoever coined the word. The word. But I wanted to bring up something that, once again, is something people forget about, that witchcraft is a religion. And we do have, outside of the Book of Shadows, we have mythologies that actually address this. Regardless of how you feel about folklore or its origins, we've got books like Aradia, Gospel of the Witches, which actually gives a myth about Aradia being the first witch, essentially. And in the craft, we have our own myths that could sort of parallel that, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, that teach you who the first witch is, who humbled themselves to take the first initiation, and thereby collected all the information first. Who was greediest, or who was most humble? Same thing.
I used to say, and this is like a while ago, but I used to say, but in response to that, who initiated the first witch, I used to say the one who didn't need to be initiated.
Well, I mean, I think it was Michael who was pointing out a story that I've told a few times about Jesus needing to be initiated.
Yes.
That's another thing that people forget, is that initiation is a part of our religious belief. It's no different than if you go in for baptism or all the other things the Catholics do, which are a great many. Or other religions. They have these ceremonies that you have to go through to be considered part of the religion. For us, obviously, initiation is also magical.
This is not a new concept. Absolutely, that we can trace back to antiquity, especially into a mystery cult. You had to be initiated, and you had to go through a human initiation. It wasn't that you just woke up one day and you were touched by the goddess.
The other thing that people say a lot, which is we are truly initiated by the gods, so we don't really need that human intervention. And so therefore, we don't need to be men and women. We need to just be whatever we want. So it doesn't matter if it is a man and man and a woman, because ultimately the gods are the ones who initiate us. What do you think about this?
I think if they come down and tell me that they have initiated you, then I will take their word for it. I think it's very obvious to anyone who understands the occult and mystery traditions and priesthoods that there's a reason why this sort of covenant has been developed. Like, I absolutely believe that Gardnerian and Alexandrian witchcraft are a part of a current of power that the gods arranged. People asked for it, but the gods arranged. If you want to make the gods laugh, tell them your plans. It really comes down to that sort of expecting people to believe your experiences. That's not going to fly. You know, if you come to me and tell me that, you know, and this happens all the time, Hecate spoke to me, or Odin gave me a vision. And I'm not saying those things don't happen, but if I didn't share it with you, I'm going to have doubts. I'm going to be skeptical. Because I meet a lot of people who say things like that. A lot of people. And I don't always believe them. You know, I don't think they're lying to me. I think that they're delusional. Not always crazy, sometimes just living in fantasy. So that happens. But if you don't have an experience with someone, you can't expect them to share in it. I think that's one of the reasons why good covens do not discuss their magic outside of people that didn't work with them, you know, at least until it's become a success story that you can brag about to your peers, I suppose. But you know, in the you know, boasting, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a real brand of ego to think that you could tell someone that God chose you and expect them to believe you, whereas it has been put in our hands already. And in witchcraft, one of the philosophies is that the gods have empowered us to take care of ourselves. We've been given life, we've been given magic, we've been given tools, we've been given wisdom. We have everything we need. And although communion with them is necessary, veneration of them is necessary, and from the worship comes the power, it's still up to us to facilitate that. You know, so they put initiation into our earliest ancestors, and somehow through the occult movement, through various unseen cloak and dagger events that are not known, the initiation of witchcraft came back into the world and is continuing today. So I think that line of succession, that line of power, is still occurring in the world. And I think the gods have already done it. They're not going to probably do it again.
There's this thing that people talk about a lot, which is my group is a social group. I need to be very comfortable with the people that I have in my coven, and we socialize all the time. In fact, it is that moves me to accept the seeker. What do you think? What is your perspective on this? What do you think?
I think people forget witchcraft is about magic. I think forget that witchcraft is about power, you know, and obviously we have the religious components, but, you know, magic is one of our religious beliefs. And we are developing priests and priestesses, so it's a vocation, it's training, you know, and that includes mental training, physical training, and magical training. Along with, I love Levi said to me on Coven once, he just turns and looks at me and says, you know, the things we do to people. And I knew what he meant, you know, because it'd been done to me. So I actually ran a coven for 25 years that was not Alexandrian, and we became a social group, and we lost the power. So I learned that lesson from experience. When I first started the New Orleans coven, I had no guidance until a very well-known elder in our tradition manipulated me and Val Hughes into working together. Val came and trained, and she didn't force it on me, but after seeing her group, the Oswistry Coven, after working with them, I knew my group was very underpowered, and we were very small at that time. So we chose to adopt the no socializing rule. And at that time, there were only 3 of us. And so we had already created that bond. So you have to kind of work around that. But we've kept the no socializing rule since. I think I'm a bit more relaxed about it than I used to be, which Ellie says sometimes. She says, you would have never let us get away with this. So I think we kind of ebb and flow. You know, I'm becoming grandpa in the craft, which is disturbing. So I think the no socializing rule isn't a craft rule. That is something that Maxine Sanders developed in the Temple of the Mother, which I do utilize, and I think it's very wise for me and my groups. Because, first of all, I've got a little bit of notoriety, and I don't want people joining thinking they're going to hang out with the cool witches. I don't want people think they're joining my coven because they're going to get a job or whatever it is they've got a delusion in their head. So right off the bat, I'm not going to be a friend. This is training. We don't socialize outside of this. And I think it cuts a lot of unnecessary drama out of groups as well, because otherwise you have to worry. I mean, they are witches. They'll all be dating each other, cheating on each other's spouses, all the wonderful things that happens when you bond in magic. So it cuts all that out. But technically speaking, it is not a craft rule.
No.
The things I wanted to point out, though, is that without giving too much away, people can do their due diligence. I'm not going to do it for them. There is craft rules that we're not really supposed to have contact with other covens unless we're high priesthood. First degrees are not supposed to be communicating, and the world of Facebook has devolved that beyond one's imagination. And I think it's most of our problems in the craft today is that no one's following those rules. And I consider craft law to be law, so I do follow them. I follow the no socializing rule out of occult wisdom. But they are two separate rules. And I think even within my coven, people have been confused by those two different things.
It has actually, to me, according to my experience, had saved a lot of unpleasant experiences.
Me and Levi were just speaking about it recently, and we do muse. I said, I wonder if someday I'll think it's a mistake. But Levi, what would it be like if I didn't have no socials rule? And he goes, our lives would be nightmares.
I would think so.
I do think that's true. I think the no socializing rule is, two of my favorite things that I learned from Val about running a group, like simple things that I could share publicly, are the no socializing rule, because she's the one that taught that to me originally, and meeting weekly, the same day, same time every week. And I've utilized both those practices since that happened. And almost 10 years now, and never turned back, and it's made my life tremendously easier, and I didn't know those things before. Back when I was doing witchcraft before I was Alexandrian, we tried very hard to be best friends with everybody, and we became best friends, but I'm telling you now, we did lose the magic, and that group originally had quite a bit of magic. And I'm glad I learned that from experience.
Yes.
No one wants to hear about Karen's hard week in finance department.
Not really. Not unless she wants to work for it.
So how would you define the Alexandrian tradition to somebody that would not know what that is?
Well, first of all, I think that it depends on, if they don't know what that is, then you're starting at ground zero, because if they don't know what that is, they don't even know what witchcraft is. At this point.
Well, they might know, they might know what Wicca is, and they might know that there are different traditions, but they don't know what Alexandrian is.
Oh, yes, but I'm a bit of a hard knockser in the sense that, I do think people can practice the religion of witchcraft without being initiated, because I think, especially today, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It doesn't make them the same thing. And part of the thing I would point out is when you're initiated as witch and a priest or priestess. It sort of denotes that you could be a witch without being a priest and priestess, even in God's mind. So I think if people are worshipping the gods as best they can, working magic and trying to get along however they can, I can consider them witches. But I do have some lines. I wouldn't consider someone who doesn't worship the goddess to be a witch. If you don't believe in the goddess, you're not a witch to me. That's a line for me. If you don't believe in magic, you're not a witch to me. There's certain lines I have, and I suppose we all have to develop that individually. I would never knock someone for requiring initiation, however, because there's a precedence for that. So when I look at words like something you were saying, in one of the things was talking about, there is a problem with succeeding a word. You, Kerrigan, were talking about the traditional Gardnerians.
Oh, yes.
And unfortunately, I know who the founders of that were.
Okay.
But that aside, I think it's a huge mistake, because in the craft, there's been a lot of seceding of words. And one of the words that was seceded was witch. Originally, in the 1950s, you had a bunch of people in England practicing the religion of witchcraft. No one was calling it Wicca. It was an older word for the word witch. It's just Old English. It's not ancient. It's not even pre-Christian. It's literally just Old English. And it's actually not pronounced Wicca. So people seceded that in America. Originally, I think it was so that they could say, well, we're the initiates. And so we're the real Wiccans. But really, it was Scott Cunningham that took that road, and so he defined Wicca for the world, not Gardner. Gardner did not define Wicca for the world. So 9 times out of 10, when most people in America are talking about Wicca, they're talking about Scott Cunningham, which has virtually nothing to do with us. And I don't know about the two of you, but I wasn't initiated as a Wiccan.
No.
And so I don't succeed the word witch to them. And I think it's a mistake to do so. So if we started calling ourselves traditional Alexandrians, we're succeeding the word Alexandrian to them. I think, unfortunately, we're stuck with the burden of saying that's not Alexandrian. That's the burden. I don't remember the point of the question. Sorry.
No, but this is a great.
How do you define it? That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's difficult to do, but for me, obviously, someone would have to have a brief understanding of what it meant to be an initiatory witch, Gardnerian or Alexandrian, to even have that conversation. So I think in defining it, you can't speak about one without speaking about the other. And I think the reality of the situation, as Levi says I'm known for saying, is that Gardner didn't consider it Gardnerian witchcraft. And originally, Alex didn't consider it Alexandrian witchcraft. Both these men considered it witchcraft, and they were working from the same Book of Shadows.
Yeah.
So the labels that have, thankfully, neither one of them succeeded the word witch, but thankfully, Gardner had no hand in this. But later on, people started needing to add labels to describe, and it was really about his and hers. And let's call it a spade a spade. The Gardnerians would have been smarter to never call themselves Gardnerian. They should have just kept the word witchcraft, and then the word Alexandrian would have never come about. But because they seceded the word witch in some way by adding Gardnerian to it, well, then eventually we seceded the word witch and added Alexandrian to it. So these labels keep breeding. And to the general public, this means nothing, not even today. I've been on TV, I've been interviewed by papers and radio, and they never ask anything about Alexandrian witchcraft. They ask about witchcraft. Like, they do care what you call it. So, but to the seeker, I would expect them, if they were interested in joining, they have to say, I want to be an Alexandrian witch. So in educating the public, I will usually educate them about the religion of witchcraft, the fact that we do have a holy doctrine, the fact that we do have rituals, where we started from, etc., etc. The point of saying how we're different doesn't matter to those people because they don't know. When someone does know, they're educated. And then it's usually initiate to people who want to be initiated, who are asking you what the differences are. And as I said earlier, I think they're really philosophical. There are some practices that are different, of course. We don't scourge for purification at every ritual, or as Maxine likes to say, bashing ourselves in the heads. We prefer to sacrifice our sanity.
Exactly.
There are some differences, of course, but I think really I look at it as we're all Catholics. Some priesthood are Jesuits and some priesthood are Franciscans. Or some people are Catholic and some people are Greek Orthodox, however you want to.
Yeah. Was this the impetus for you, Brian, to write Initiation into Witchcraft? To give seekers that education or that starting point?
Yes. A lot of that was, one of the chapters I think that a lot of initiates were thankful for was the fact that I gave the ideas of lines that I knew about, because of course there's probably myriads, but the most important ones I think are put in there. And it shows the difference because, that's what I meant earlier about walking the tightrope. I wouldn't say because a coven works differently than me, they're not Alexandrian, but there are some that aren't. But I put it down more to belief. If they're like practicing, if they've gotten rid of the gods, or the gods are just ideas, abstract ideas that you can turn into a hermaphrodite or something, then that's not what we're talking about here. We have a god and a goddess. We certainly do have a concept of a one that is certainly beyond sex, but that's not the gods we're working with. That's a higher concept. So, there's religious beliefs that I think people get caught up in social constructs. Like, I'm just assuming we're all three practicing homosexualists.
Yes.
As my teacher would call us.
Nice.
Brian, you're a practicing homosexualist. But, and we probably all have had myriads of people in our lives from different walks. As a I'm not going to say my age, but as somebody, as somebody who had trans friends in my 20s before this was ever a thing, it gets weird to all of a sudden be told you're not saying things right. When I actually was doing this before you people were ever thinking about it, not you guys, obviously, but we're not, we're not in the craft nowadays. I'm sure it still has them, but predominantly we're not homophobic, we're not transphobic, we're not any of those things. We just simply have a religious belief. And when I'm working with the priestess, I'm working with my mother. And if you can't fit the bill of my mother or my wife or my sister, I'm not going to be able to see you that way. It would be like putting an Aphrodite statue on the altar with a penis.
Yeah.
It's not going to mentally relate the same way. But also it's about the whole experience. Like I look at the fact that we would never deny anyone initiation into the craft because they were trans or because of anything else necessarily. How we initiate is also not a conversation we would ever have with an initiate.
Mm-hmm.
I never go to any initiate and say, how would you like to be initiated and who would you like to do it? I don't understand that even being a conversation. If I was initiating a trans person, they would have just as much information as a non-trans person would have, and they wouldn't know who was initiating them until they were in the initiation. And, that's the way that it goes. They would be informed as to our belief system as much as I can tell an outsider, but I don't understand this weird concept that we sort of have to explain. It is a mystery cult. And I think as Kerrigan knows as well as I do, and maybe you too, Michael, a lot of these initiate leaders out there who are placating all of this stuff, they're lying. They're not doing it in their circles. They're lying and they're dancing around the subject.
Wow.
I think so too.
So. And it's fine. But, like you were saying, Michael, there's tons of traditions out there that cater to all sorts of lifestyles. I think if you're going to join a religion, whether it's witchcraft, Buddhism, Christianity, you should probably be well informed as to the beliefs and you should relate to them.
I like that you are repeating religion, and then I can't help but think about excited about your book, right? That's due out, and it's very specific and very consciously titled, right? The Religion of Witchcraft. Assume that, right? That was your intention, and then. What does this book fulfill that hasn't been done before?
Well, as a magical person, I won't completely know until it's done. But I can tell you the goal, tell the gods your plan. If you want to make the gods laugh, tell them your plans. Yep. Initiation to witchcraft was really about keeping the story alive, and I do think I succeeded at coming at Story Craft in a unique angle that still stayed true to our founders, because I think the books our founders wrote are all we really need.
Yeah.
But if we don't have new content by current priesthood, we will fade into the background, as we can see, right? But basically, the religion of witchcraft is the things I didn't say in the first book, as well as I'm being a little bit more inclusive because I do think the religion of witchcraft goes beyond the priesthood. I think it's important that we realize that there is evolving laity out there that may never amount to anything. I started getting contacted by people who aren't initiates, and they would choose to recognize me as a priest. And they would say things like, you're my priest. I'm thinking, well, I'm not. But, they would say things like that. And I realized that there are people who feel like that because in their heart, they are practicing the religion and at this point haven't become initiated or believe in the sanctity of initiation and simply do not choose to become priesthood. And if they believe in the things we believe and they're sincere, I think they are practicing the religion of witchcraft.
Interesting.
But I'm obviously mostly focusing on the priesthood and our things as well. So I'm giving a little representation. I have a sneak peek. I have a chapter called Interview with Witches, and I'm interviewing witches from multiple traditions with the same questions.
Oh, great.
So you can pre-order, right, the book?
You can pre-order right now at hexwitch.com and probably salemallman.com as well.
Yeah, omsan.com, yeah. But let's not forget that you have another book that was released in 2019. Was it?
I think Initiation into Witchcraft and
Yes.
These will be the only books I write about witchcraft.
And because the second one, which has not yet come up, but you can pre-order, you do not, it's good to have the two because one follows the other, so it would be a nice way.
It's sort of like a weird sequel, but you do have to repeat some information because when you're writing a book like that, you can't presume that someone's read the first one.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's certain repeats, like about, the Witch's Creed or the Threefold Law. There's certain repeat things like that, which basically tell you, you guys don't really know what this means.
So, sometimes you don't need to say. It's almost like that thing they say. What is it? Tell them again, and then tell them that you told them. Yeah.
I think I do think that one of the things that you guys are doing very well on this program is that you're definitely putting out the information appropriately. There was another thing you guys were talking about.
Yes.
Which was dual lineage, which we sort of addressed.
Oh, yes. Dual lineage, yes.
Technically speaking, I think we all have a bit of dual lineage these days. What does that mean? I think it goes back to Alex didn't need to, if Alex trained someone from Gardnerian to Alexandrian, technically, maybe that's why he didn't do it. Maybe he saw the dual lineage coming and he's like, no, thanks, I'm not adding to that. He was very psychic, they say. I do have an instance. I have my niece, Angel, which she wouldn't mind saying who she is. She's from Massachusetts, and she was Gardnerian, first degree Gardnerian in a coven here for about 4 years in Massachusetts, and then, or maybe it wasn't that long, but she left it for quite a period of time. So she chose to leave and wasn't working for many years. And because of her association with my husband, Christian Day, the evil, dark Christian Day, they decided after years of her not being in the coven to recule her, which is a American Gardnerian version of excommunication. It's completely ridiculous. So needless to say, she eventually decided she wanted to work again, and we got hooked up, and she wanted to work for me. And I originally did say, you don't need to be reinitiated. But because of that reculement and her abuse, she did suffer a lot of abuse from that group. Forced tattoo.
Oh my gosh.
They kept her book of shadows and everyone else's in a safe, so no one was allowed to bring it home. And I could go on and on and on, but she had very negative feelings, and they'd already excommunicated her, so she did repeatedly ask me, I want to be initiated. So we did do it. So I've actually never been able to follow that rule, but I do tell them it's not necessary. But in a sense, I suffer from that because my original lineage was from the Kintish line here in Massachusetts, and I didn't transfer lineage because I was not initiated properly or because I thought it was invalid. I didn't need to transfer lineage, quite frankly. But when I hooked up with Val, I had met the teacher that I'd always dreamed of. Yeah. And I fell completely in love with her and, basically begged. I was like, I want to trace through you. And so I chose to do the same thing in a sense. But so I get it. I think that we're challenged sometimes with, we have to take into thought the care of the initiate and make our best judgment call, I suppose. And in Angel's sense, I thought she had been terribly abused. And I don't know if I made the right call, but I made the compassionate one.
Definitely valid reasons and psychological, reasons as well. Because even though we think, once a witch, always a witch, there is that psychological need for a new initiation.
They had magically done something that they believed made her not Gardnerian anymore. And that was something that she was trained in. So, yeah, I think she had a seed there.
Well, but the thing is, that happened to me as well, within the Alexandrian tradition. It depends on, and it's your call, really. I mean, you said you made the compassionate call on it, but, it depends. And it depends on the situation, it depends on the initiate, it depends on so many things. And ultimately, it's also their call as well if they wanted to go. You can analyze it, and I did analyze it at the time, and I said maybe that would be a better solution. And because of all of the things that were said and done in the initiation rite that were not right. And so I decided, let's just do another initiation. And, sometimes these things, it's circumstantial, really, and it depends on, so many factors. But I did reinitiate Alexandrians, actually.
We did once.
I did once only as well.
It might have been the same. The two people may have been from the same coven.
It's exactly that. So you got one, I got another one. So
well, I wish you would have got mine. Anyway,
oh no,
that's another story. So that I put down about your discussion about people who might make changes to the tradition. I think it's important, because like I said, we're walking a tightrope, and I think that's a difficult conversation because we all have encountered those people who are like, we're autonomous, we're doing it. Or here's my favorite one. When Maxine has come out and basically told them they're doing everything wrong, and then they come out and say, we're doing it Alex's way.
Yes, I've literally heard that.
And I'm like, no, you are not. I literally had someone tell Christian that about separating the 3 degrees. And I'm like, you don't even know that was from Alex. Like, that's Alex did that. Yeah, twice he didn't do it with Jerry Greenslade and the Farrars, but it was his practice to put the second and third together. It was later people who really chasing Gardnerian tail, I think. And quite frankly, I think the Gardnerians used to put them together. But variation versus deviation, I think there's a huge difference. When I was contemplating me and Rosie and the these and the thous and the bids, like the variations on the same practice or practices versus completely just deviating and saying, well, I want to separate the degrees because I'm doing it Alex's way, when it wasn't even Alex's way.
Yeah,
that's right. But these are very important points because sometimes people say, well, they get all of the excuses in the world to actually deviate and change radically and cut this and cut that. We're going to talk about this, Michael, on the episode about tradition.
Yeah.
We're going to do one on tradition, and we're going to talk about that, about, all of the things that we think that are important to mention in terms of what would it be recognizable or what would it be. I remember when we did the first Grand Sabbath in America, and when we got into the circle, I'm sure that if we would talk to all of the initiates that were there, there probably had a lot of deviations and a lot of, adaptations and a lot of things like that. But when we got all inside of the circle, I don't think there was any difference. Although, you are the one who is conducting the ritual. What are you doing? But still, I mean, I think that it is.
I have been the opposite, where I have been in circles to where I thought, what are you doing?
Yes, me too.
It's done very poorly, which isn't the same.
Yes.
You were asking earlier, and I don't think I quite answered it. If I was talking to an initiate about the differences between Alexandrian and Gardnerian, or someone who was knowledgeable on the subject, had read all the elders' books and had an idea. I mean, there's so many things, really. I mean, we have more in common than we do separate, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other caste of people on the planet that we share more with than the Gardnerians. And most Gardnerians see us as equally valid, including some very old school ones. So I would say it's obviously we don't scourge for purification. We don't retain the measure. We are across the board more balanced. A priest can start a coven. A priest can cast a circle, which in some Gardnerian lines they can as well. I would say that one of the things I really love, because I think freedom is a tenet of the religion of witchcraft, but I think we really embraced it, and Alex took things out that were too controlling. The beauty, not just aesthetically, but
yes,
that helps.
Yeah.
But power, the fact that I think we're the one witchcraft tradition on Earth currently, to my mind, that does not apologize for wanting to wield power. I think that we're like, this is the point of this. It's what you do with it. I think a lot of traditions apologize. It's like, oh, I don't want to be egotistical. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be aggressive. And power is power. It doesn't have an alignment. It's how you use it, but it is wielded much in the same way. I think all those little things, how we operate in our covens, how we also not taking on too many, this whole witch queen thing, that's an interesting thing. You know, if you go off what Maxine and Alex said, you know, it means something completely different than what the Ferrars say. And I suspect they got all that from Dorian Linte.
No.
I think there's a lot of that goes on, is that some Alexandrians have readopted Gardnerian things. Notice Alex and Maxine were never running around with moon horns and stag horns.
No.
Really, other than, you know, the Alexandrian crown, other than that, we didn't have an official one, you know. So there's lots of things we didn't do that they did, that some Alexandrians do now, which it is witchcraft, so I'm not saying it's bad, but I think people are missing out on embracing a beautiful culture and a beautiful tribe that is flourishing and exists. And if they would just pay more attention to the living world than Facebook, they could find it.
Just like a very well-known elder of our tradition would say, we have few secrets and many mysteries.
Yes.